Greetings, everyone. This is Josh here at Horror Hangouts, and for tonight we have a special episode. We're going to be talking about the Friday the 13th franchise, and joining me, making her second appearance on the show, is writer and filmmaker and author and rock and roll historian herself, Staci Layne Wilson. How are you doing, Staci?
I'm doing great. And I'm also a big fan of the Friday the 13th franchise. So I'm happy to be here to talk about it.
Yep, that's why we're here because we have a Friday the 13th coming up next week. Though by the time everyone watches this, it'll be Friday the 13th. But one thing a lot of people may not know, or maybe they do know, is you actually did some work on Crystal Lake, the docu series Crystal Lake Memories. So, explain what you did on that series.
Well, that was like a fun little comedic mockumentary where they had different characters reimagined. And so I was the sister of one of the Friday the 13th murder victims. And Dan Farrens directed that little skit, and it was really a lot of fun to do. I played a stripper who doesn't take her clothes off, so it was a bit goofy. I got to kind of pole dance a little bit, and it was just kind of wild. I think I had I had like a white bob wig, and I did some kind of a robot dance, and I can't dance, so the comedic element was in great evidence there.
You're gonna have to go back and rewatch that.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
No shame, I can't dance either. My wife says that dancing with me is like dancing with Frankenstein's monster. So,
Oh my
yeah,
gosh. Yeah, I can relate. And then I was also in his name was Jason as a talking head. Not disembodied though, like you'd think I would be for this series. But yeah, I was just talking about this franchise and the series. As a film journalist, I covered some of the later installments in this series. I was on set for the 2009 kind of reimagining with Derek
right.
Mears as Jason. So yeah, it's been a
Awesome.
favorite since I was a kid. I saw it when it debuted in 1980, and it was always on cable. So me and my friends would watch it at slumber parties late at night and be scared out of our wits and not sleep all night long. So it's been with me for many, many years.
As it has been for most of us, because I think you're probably a little bit, you might be a little bit younger than me, but I think we both came up in the same era. And I kind of like, and
Yeah,
I think
Gen
you'll like,
X.
yeah, we're Gen Xers, the funnest, the funnest generation there is. The forgotten generation anymore, but I think we're the funnest because now everyone talks about the boomers versus millennials, and it's like we're like caught right here in the middle, and it's like that meme you see of
That's right.
someone, a Gen Xer off to the side just having a drink while the boomers and millennials fight amongst each other.
Yes, we're definitely the oh well, whatever, never mind generation.
I'm kidding. Thing about, and I think you'll like this comparison. I look at the Friday the 13th franchise, and I kind of consider it my third favorite behind the Hellraiser and Halloween. But it's definitely the most consistent franchise. I think it's like I compare it to, I say Friday the 13th is the ACDC of horror franchises because they have, because the old joke is about ACDC, every song sounds the same, every album sounds the same, which
Yeah.
isn't necessarily
Right.
true, but they do what
Yeah.
they do. They have this simple but effective um progression in every song, every album, and it just works. And I think Friday the 13th does the same thing. It's pretty simple. We're going to have a killer, we're going to have blood, and we're going to have oftentimes boobs. And then that's pretty much the formula. And normally it takes place in a campground, though one time they decided to go out of space. But it seems to be effective almost every time, except when maybe when they want to go to Manhattan. for 5 minutes out of the
Yeah,
movie. But
that was probably the worst one, but there's always something to find, in one of these movies that you'll like. You're right. I think it really is a very consistent franchise, and you expect what you're going to see, and you certainly
mhm.
do get to see what you think you're going to. So yeah, I think that's what keeps the Jason character alive and well after all these decades.
Oh yeah. So when, getting to the very first one that came out in 1980, was that the first one you had seen in the series? Did
Yeah,
you like?
yeah, I was a
Okay.
kid when it came out, and that was definitely the first one. And the first time seeing it, of course, it was so shocking to see who the real killer was, and then to
Mhm.
watch it progress. And you think of the hockey mask as always being part of Jason's costume, so to speak, but
Right.
it really wasn't fully brought to fruition until part three, a couple of years later.
Oh yeah, and with me with the first one, it's one of those ones where most series, the first movie in a series, whether it's whatever, it could be Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, Candyman, Hellraiser, most people will cite the first one as always their favorite or the best. And this is one where it's not always necessarily everyone's favorite in the series. Like it's in my probably my bottom half, but towards the middle part for me. I still like it, still
Oh,
good. Like I said, they're all pretty much I'll with the exception of a couple we'll get to later. It's one I'll certainly rewatch. And maybe because it wasn't the first one that I watched, I had seen chapter 4, I think, first, then chapter
oh, okay.
7, then going
Hmm.
back and seeing this one, it probably did throw me for a loop a little bit, but on the surface, it's still a pretty good, solid slasher movie. It's got some good build up, maybe a little slow at times. Good kills by Savini, um, as you would expect from him, and it was Kevin Bacon was in it, so
That's right. One of the
which
best
for
death
you
scenes.
girls would have loved it too. He was like
Right.
wearing kind of a
Yeah.
skimpy little bathing suit, but
Hmm. Yeah. Now, as I told you before we started recording here, that I've been watching the franchise, but I'm not that kind of like nerdy fan who knows
right.
I don't know all the different what goes where. So, which is the one with the sleeping bag kill? Because that's one of the best ones.
That's chapter 7.
Okay.
Chapter
Yeah.
7's when we
That's
see
a
that,
really
and
brutal
we
one.
and we see that again in Jason X. Again,
Yeah.
they
Yeah, right.
redo
A
that
little
one,
nod
and,
to
and,
that. Hmm.
and we get to that to once we get to chapter 7, which is which was Kane Hodder's first role as Jason too. But yeah, I remember watching it first time and I was like, wait, where's Jason coming out? Yeah, because I didn't quite understand all the lore, and then I started to get it. I'm like, oh, who's this little old lady? Who I say old lady, she's probably a year younger than I am when she did the movie,
Right.
but she that gave you up to that point. We really hadn't had any. Maybe in the giallo genre, but we hadn't really in North America had a actual female slasher villain up to that point that I'm aware of. So that was kind
Yeah,
of
and when you
groundbreaking in
mention
itself.
when we mention Giallo, Mario Bava's Bay of Blood, I think was very influential to the Friday the 13th movies. I don't know if Sean Cunningham has ever really admitted that or said that in any interviews, but you can really see a lot of similarities if you watch the first Friday the 13th and Bay of Blood, which came out in 1974, I believe.
Yeah, 33. And you took the words out of my mouth because I watched Bay of Blood the first time earlier this year. In fact, I think it was shortly after our first discussion we had. And
Mm-hmm.
I was like watching it. I'm like, I think Victor Miller and Sean Cunningham were big fans of this movie because there's some there are some scenes and some sequences that are almost felt like it was a Friday the 13th film. So I'm like, huh.
Hmm.
Because a lot of people say
Yeah.
Friday the 13th is a rip off of Halloween. And I'm like, only because they're going off a holiday, but really, it's it certainly shows that Bay of Blood might have been more influential on it. Couldn't find my words.
Right. Yeah, I know that Sean Cunningham is a real cinephile, and he's done a lot of different kinds of movies. I think he might have even, if I'm not mistaken, started out in X-rated films or doing something with those, like kind of the underground movies before
Hmm.
he had his big breakout with Friday the 13th.
Yeah, because he would go on. I mean, directed the first one, and I'm thinking he stayed on as producer for some of the other ones because
Yeah.
yeah, because when you get to Friday the 13th Part 2 now, I think it was Steve Miner who took over, who directed both 2 and 3, if I'm not mistaken. Um, but 2, Chapter 2, that's probably my second favorite of the series. Mainly because I think it has the best final girl in the series, the character of Ginny, because I liked how they, she's a psychology student and she kind of used that training to kind of get inside of Jason's head. And of course, this is the first movie we see Jason as the main killer, only this time he's wearing a potato sack. But,
That's right. Yeah, yeah. Amy Steele was really good in that.
and you started seeing the kills a little bit more elaborate. I think we all remember the wheelchair kill on poor, and I
Oh
forget the
yeah.
character's name. But the thing about that movie too is a lot of oftentimes slasher movies get the rap that, oh, all these characters are throwaway characters and you root for them to get killed. And grant there's always a few that you do, but I just remember that particular character and the girl that's kind of like hitting on him. You kind of like those two characters, so you do kind of feel bad when those two get killed eventually. Which is something I think Friday the 13th, I think Halloween does this too, that kind of separates them most with some of the other slasher films, I think, is having some decent characters in there that you can root for.
Yeah, I think A Nightmare on Elm Street does that too.
Hmm. So, yeah, so too, we got to see, and it seems like every actor that's played Jason has always brought something different to that role. They might latch on to something that the previous actor did, but then do something different. And I can't remember who played him in two. I think it was actually two different people played him at times.
Mhm.
So there's been contention of that, but I did like that look. It's kind of like once again, another movie that might have paid homage to was, oh, now I'm going to forget, The Town That Dreaded Sundown.
Oh yeah, of course, with the sack head.
Hmm. So once again, probably
Hmm.
another movie that Sean Cunningham might have been a big fan of, along with Bay of Blood, that might have influenced him for Jason to have that look in the second film.
Yeah, that makes sense. And also the fact that they really churn them out at first, because you have the first one in 80, the second one in 81, the third one in 82, and then the fourth one in 84. So you could definitely count on this franchise to come and scare us every year, which I think was a good thing that really built up the momentum and the legend of Jason.
Oh yeah, because I've known a lot of people will say that the one thing they would look forward to the most every summer, because that's pretty much a summertime horror
Yeah.
movie, was waiting for that next Friday the 13th to come out every year, or if not every year, every other year. So, yeah, you're
Yeah.
right. It kind of became a fixture during the summer. It's like something that was expected to go along with, oh, what you do on your summer vacation? Oh, I can't wait to see the new Friday the 13th film when it comes out. And
Right. Definitely.
you wonder, God, how many more of these are they gonna make? And you think
Yeah.
you would have thought
Yeah.
by now they would have easily hit 13, but they
I
haven't
know,
yet.
right? Well,
Because
that's going to be a big event.
I don't really count Jason versus Freddy as a Friday the 13th movie per se any more than I would count as a Nightmare on Elm Street. It's just kind of a mashup, really, because it's really not. So I really
Yeah,
don't
it
count
doesn't.
that one
Yeah,
per
it doesn't
se.
really follow the rules per se, yeah, like you mentioned. But yeah, that was fun. Although I don't know, it could have been better, but it was fun. I covered that as a reporter when I was working on the
Really.
red carpet, and yeah,
I think, not to get off out of sequence, but I think with Jason versus Freddy, what was missing, and you can always bring people back from the dead. It's horror movies can sometimes be like soap operas, but it would have been so much better had they been able to bring back one of the legacy protagonists from each series to really kind of
yeah,
give it some strength. So if you could have brought Heather Langenkamp back on the Nightmare on Elm Street side of things, replay Nancy, which they kind of did because she did show up in Wes Craven's The New Nightmare, and then if you could have brought back whomever, Corey Feldman, you could have brought him back as Tommy Jarvis.
yeah. I'm sure he would have done it.
I'm sure he would have too, or any of the others, or you bring back Amy Steele, or you could bring back Lard Park Lincoln, who played the psychic, um, played the basically Carrie in Chapter 7. Would have, I think, added a little bit more to the movie, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
But, going on to part 3, this is where we see the hockey mask. And I'm not real sure why they decided on it. I think it was just probably a fluke where they thought, well, let's have him wear something different. And I don't know if the idea was to have him have a different mask in every movie, but once he put on that hockey mask, that was pretty much it. That's what we're going to see him
Oh
in.
yeah.
And of course, that movie was made in 3D, which
Yeah, I actually got to see it in 3D
mhm.
in a revival screening in LA several years back. And actually, my friend and my attorney, Larry Zerner, plays Shelley in that movie. And it's funny because
Oh,
he has a
wow.
line about being an attorney. Yeah, but now he's an entertainment attorney in Los Angeles, and he's a great guy. So he went to that screening too, and it was really fun just to have all the super fans there in the audience and kind of relive that crazy time of 1982. Um, yeah, that's a fun movie. I like that one because that's when you
Yeah,
start to get more of the comedic element into the franchise.
definitely with that one. And that's cool that you know Larry because that's one of the memorable characters is the character of Shelley because he's this awkward, nerdy type of guy who's not very good with women and lacks social skills, which a lot of us horror fans when we were younger probably could relate to that character in one way or another. Um, But yeah, so that's good. I always like the two, even though they felt out of place, the two stoners they're in that movie. I mean, granted, they both look like they
Yeah,
were in their 40s at the time. I don't know if they
yeah,
were
right.
supposed to be the same age as the kids that were in that movie or not, but they were like they were out of place, but yet it was cool having them there, if that makes
Oh
any
yeah, kind of
sense.
the Cheech and Chong of the Friday the 13th world, I suppose. But yeah, there was some fun, kind of goofy, over the top, and lovable characters in that one.
Yeah, and I thought the final girl in that one, Chris, she's a little bit more underrated in the series, but I thought did a good job. Um,
Yeah.
and then one thing, I don't know what you think about this growing up in the 80s, but to me, if you see a guy in a movie or a TV show that wears their sweater by tying up the
The
arms of the
preppy look.
sweater
Yep.
around their neck, that's
Yeah.
like an automatic. That was like the automatic signal saying, "Okay, there's the douchebag of the movie right there," and the guy that was
Yeah,
in
and
there
the guy
doing the
who's
same
gonna
thing.
die, like the red shirt in Star Trek.
Star Trek, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And his death was the best because his eyes pop up right at you, even though it's
Yeah. Yeah, you can't go wrong with that.
always like the yo-yo scene. We're showing the guy trying to do the yo-yo, and it's coming right at your face, and They had to
Hmm.
really
Yeah, that kind of
emphasize
reminds me of
this
the.
is in 3D.
I know, right? Like that juggling scene in House of Wax, the 3D House of Wax as well. Yeah.
Hmm. Oh yeah, and they had a juggling scene there. It looked like uh, Larry could really juggle. That was one talent he had in that movie. There, the I don't know, they were juggling, trying to
Yeah.
show off. I think in front of the ladies or whatnot. But
Right. Yeah. I mean, every trick in the book for that 3D experience. But of course, a lot of people didn't get to see it that way because it was on heavy rotation on cable. So it had to work both ways.
yeah, I didn't get a chance to see that in the theaters, so that was like one of those. I said that part four was the first one I watched. I think part three is probably about my third one I may have seen, so I really saw them out of order. But
Oh,
that
wow.
one's also
Yeah.
that's one's probably top, definitely in my top five for sure. Part three is as goofy as is, and then you have like that little motorcycle gang or whatever that just pop up
Yeah.
for no
I mean, it's
reason.
just such a crazy cast, like the Fellini movie or something. I don't know. It's pretty wild.
Well, we get to part four, and chapter four is my favorite of the series, and I think it's because maybe as seeing that young, seeing something you hadn't seen too often at that time, other than maybe I guess you could say The Shining, maybe, but where you have a kid as your main, or at least one of your main protagonists. So I think that made the whole experience that much more relatable. He's a horror fan. He makes his own masks, and of course, played by
Yeah.
Corey Feldman.
Yeah, that's fun. Like he's a monster kid, like Tom Savini was. And, it kind of, I think, uh, probably the screenwriters were monster kids and could relate to that. And then you have, of course, Crispin Glover in the film. He's always a memorable face and was
A
kind of
memorable
iconic.
dance. We talked earlier
Yeah,
about how
speaking
neither
of
one of
can't
us can
dance.
dance. He makes me
Yeah,
feel better about
exactly.
myself watching him dance. 'Cause I'm like, yeah, I
No
know that.
kidding. Yeah.
Originally too, they were dancing to an AC/DC song originally, and
Really, I
I
did
had
not know
heard
that.
this, and I forget which AC/DC song it was supposed to be, but they, for whatever reason, maybe they couldn't afford to get the rights to play that song. They end up going with something different, but he was actually, I guess, dancing to an AC/DC song. So that's interesting concern. I just mentioned AC/DC's that
That's right. Yeah. Well, that might explain why he's not dancing very well. You can't
I don't
really
think you
dance to
dance
AC.
that way to AC/DC either, but
Well, you're probably right. Yeah.
and that one had like I think that one. I mean, I also like Ted White played Jason in this one. Previous was Richard Brooker, who first did the mask or hockey mask. And I kind of like Ted White's take because it's one of the more brutal Jasons, I think, up to that point. You have some good, memorable kills. You have some good characters because this,
What's
instead
your
of just taking
favorite?
place in one house, it's really going back and forth between where Tommy Jarvis's family's living and then where all these kids are partying. So it's like he's
Yeah.
takes out one
Yeah.
house and goes for the other.
Right. That's more Halloween esque, I guess, where, Michael Myers is going from house to house. So, what's your favorite kill in the film?
I would say think it was, well, poor Crispin Glover, but I think it was his kill. He first gets the corkscrew screw in the hand and then the cleaver right through the face. So that was kind of, from what I can remember, I think that was
Yeah, that's
probably my
painful.
favorite. Yeah.
Yeah, mine too.
Like too, they kind of almost did a kind of like well, I don't want to say a reverse psycho kill, but normally it's the girl that gets killed in the shower, and that one had the guy got killed in the shower. So I thought that was kind of, I don't know if that was them paying a reverse homage to the psycho or not, or just in the script and it was the way it was. But
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Possibly. I mean, we've seen that the previous ones all had at least one little homage to another movie, so it could well be.
one fun fact, you probably didn't know this one. or Ted White, who had played Jason, had been a career stuntman for about probably up to that point 30 years. So he had done a lot of westerns, worked with John Wayne and all kinds of different actors, and he was pretty a no nonsense guy. I guess he has said publicly before he passed away that he honestly wanted to kill Corey Feldman on set because I guess he was a real brat or
Oh,
whatever.
well,
But
method
one
acting.
cool, yeah, but he was like also one scene, if you remember, where the girl who's out in the lake and she's on a raft and she gets killed from Jason there in the middle of the lake. When they shot that, it was really cold out. And I guess the director was being too much of a perfectionist. He wanted to reshoot it. And finally, Ted White, who played Jason, said, enough. She's freezing to death. We're You've got enough takes. That's it. I'm taking her out of here because he could tell. And I guess being a pro, he probably could tell when someone's going to have hypothermia because she was naked, of course, during
Yeah,
that scene. So
right.
he probably realized it. So it's like just a fun little fact that he was pretty much a no nonsense old school guy in the middle of a modern slasher film at the time.
Yeah, that is pretty cool.
Did you have like any memorable scenes from that movie?
Um, well, I think that when Tommy Jarvis is shaving his head and trying to kind of embody the young
Hmm.
Jason, that would be probably one of the more iconic scenes, and one that I also thought that the acting was especially on point.
Oh yeah, I mean that is probably one of the best, probably sequences in the whole franchise, I think. And maybe that's another reason because we see him just go pretty much batshit crazy on Jason at the very
Yeah.
end. And it's like, well, next month I'll be doing a series on Halloween. It's what I wanted to see Halloween do with what they did with Tommy Jarvis in 4, 5, and 6. That's what I wanted Halloween to do with the Jamie Lloyd character in 4, 5, and 6 instead of going in the route that they went. But was I just wanted to see her just go completely psycho and kind of follow that model, but they of course went in a different direction, and that's I'll discuss that later next month probably. But
Okay.
yeah, and also too they had a little callback to 3 because there was that one guy, and I forget once again I'm bad with character names for the most part, but he was searching for one of the girls who were murdered in part 3. He was there searching for her, trying to find her, which they kind of introduced that element in the, I guess you want to call it the remake or the reboot. They kind of introduced that same element there too. So I thought that
Yeah,
was
I
like a
mean,
cool
that's
little tie-in to part 3.
right, and I think that part four probably has more subplots than most of the films, which are kind of following just one group of people.
Yeah, for sure. And also note that 2, 3, and 4 are all supposed to take place one day after one another. So technically, by the time you get to chapter 4, they're really on Sunday the 15th, I think. Which
Okay.
is, yeah, which is something. But if you watch at the very end, each movie takes over right after the other. So it's
Hmm.
kind of a neat little thing they did there. I think it's the only, so you could almost call 2, 3, and 4 almost a true trilogy in that regard, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, they're
So
fun to watch back to back, and then I think you can kind of skip around after that.
you probably could. I mean, well, we get to 5, and 5 is an interesting and divisive one. This one definitely was directed by a guy who used to do X-rated films, and it kind of shows in the movie because I think it probably has might have the most nudity out of all the films, and that's saying quite a bit. But part 5 gets divisive because it's really not Jason doing the killing.
That's right. Yeah, that's more of like the old bait and switch, as they used to say. Yeah, and that was kind of a fun twist, I guess, at the time, but I don't know if it's aged as well as it could have if you go back and watch that one. Um, in my opinion, it's one of the weaker ones.
Yeah, it's one that seems to get a little bit more love now, or rather, people just enjoy it for what it is. I think it's mainly because of the humor, because that's another one that's really heavy on the humor with the, I don't want to say old lady, but the middle-aged lady with the not so bright son. I think her name was, I want to say Agnes, but I'm probably butchering that.
I
But
don't remember myself, but yeah,
she
yeah,
had a
and
lot of
I
crude
like
stuff to say.
right. Shabar Ross was great in that too. I thought he was one of the best characters in that particular film.
Oh yeah, yeah, it's a fun movie, and I'll say this much for it. I think it does the, oh well, I'm trying to think of the word I want to say. It does the fake killer thing better than they did in Halloween Ends as a comparison, because you knew in Halloween Ends that it was the Corey character doing the killing in Michael's mask. We really didn't know. I guess the copycat killer angle is what I was looking for. We really didn't know, is this Jason really back from the dead? Could this be Tommy Jarvis now assuming that mantle? And then, of course, we find out it's neither. It's good old Roy at the end, which didn't make
Right.
much sense because it seems
Spoiler
to me
alert.
the only person he should have been really killing is the guy who actually killed his son with the candy bar. Not everyone else, but
Right.
well,
Yeah, I guess he just figured, hey, I'm on a roll. I might as well keep going.
that he did. And of course, there's even like the movie certainly has a lot of tongue in cheek stuff, like almost like a wink and a nod to the camera, almost like it almost feel like at times they were breaking the fourth wall in that film. But yeah, so that one kind of came and went, and then came six, which is a favorite of a lot of people. That's in a lot of people's top three or four, and maybe because it's the actual conclusion of the Tommy Jarvis trilogy. Because of course he's in five, and now we see him again in six. That once again played by a different actor, but this time we get the
Yeah.
final confrontation between him and Jason, and we see how Jason can now come back to life through lightning, and now this is the
Yeah.
beginning of zombie Jason, kind of.
Right. And yet another homage because this is definitely a nod to Frankenstein.
Hmm. Oh yeah. So you could see that the people who wrote and directed these films were obviously longtime horror fans and probably had been watching them. So they seems like in most of these films they'll throw in a little nod to an older horror
Yeah.
film. It's also
Yeah. And that's, oh, go on.
no, I was gonna say it's like I said, it seems to be amongst most of the people's favorite. Maybe because this is the beginning of, maybe it was like the beginning of the zombie Jason, because before he'd been a little bit more grounded of a character. So now he's got a little bit of a supernatural element to him. This is
Hmm.
the end of the Tommy Jarvis era, I guess you could say, who became one of the main protagonists of the film, kind of like almost the Laurie Strode of that series. Given the
Hmm.
fact he was in three of the character anyway was in three of the movies, and then
Yeah.
so yeah, I'm like trying to think though. I think also it establishes that Jason really won't kill little kids because he had plenty of opportunities to do so. Because he actually had a campground with kids there. Normally, we're just following the counselors. This story, I think, and maybe this is another reason why it's a favorite, is we actually get to see kids at the campground instead of just the counselors. I'm wondering.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, yeah, I just thought I do remember that the special effects for the lightning bolt and everything were just really fun to see on the big screen. Yeah, it's definitely a fan fave, and it's one of the better installments. Now, do you remember who directed this one?
That that I do not know. I'm like I can remember the directors one through four because I think it was Joseph Zito directed the fourth one. Like we mentioned earlier, Steve Miner did two and three, and Sean Cunningham one. But after that, it's kind of a foggy mess as far as who directed them after that, but he did a good job. And the name escapes
Yeah.
me, but it seems to me he went and did some other movies besides Part Six.
Yeah, I'm gonna look that up because I have such a device where I can do that. But
Oh, we're gonna.
so
I keep on forgetting. I have a cell phone. I could look it up real quick in 5 seconds. People
I
don't
know it's
realize we're
just
part of the encyclopedia generation.
indeed. So let's see who. Oh, Tom McLaughlin. No wonder.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, he did a lot of different things. Let me see what else he's done. So, sometimes they come back. Stephen King movie.
Okay. I remember that. That was
Yeah.
like a made-for-TV movie. I think that.
Yeah,
I
with
think that
the
starred Tim Matheson, wasn't it? I think he
yeah,
was in
right.
that.
That was like the 50s greasers coming back to bully the their victim from beyond the grave. So yeah, Tom McLaughlin did quite a few. I mean, just he worked quite a bit. So he was kind of a journeyman director.
Well, there we go then.
Yep.
So we
Oh,
know
and
that.
Prophecy. Oh, that's a good one. Prophecy,
Oh, with Christopher
1979. Remember
Walken.
that one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So he had
But
he
no,
had some
John
movies under.
Frankenheimer directed that. But so he
Oh,
must have been in it because I know he was a stuntman. Let me see.
okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Anyway,
that's
so there's the
unusual.
connection.
A former going on to be a director. I don't know if I know too many
Yeah.
scenarios where that's the case. I guess you could say, in a way, Nick Castle, because he went on after playing Michael Myers, he directed like movies like Last Starfighter and a few other movies.
Yeah.
And I guess technically you could call his role being a stunt man for the most part. So I guess just don't hear
Yeah. Well, these
hear of
movies
that very
I
often.
definitely have a lot of stunts, so it makes sense.
It would. You would think that would be more of a occurrence nowadays, but
Hmm.
maybe not. So six, definitely a popular one. Trying to think, my most memorable is probably the kill in the RV when they're driving, and he smashes that one girl's face so hard into the panel that makes an imprint in there. If you
Oh
remember
wow.
that scene.
I don't remember that, but they all kind of blend together after a while. But I actually bought the box set recently because I wanted to have a movie night with friends and watch X, which is one of my favorites, the one that takes place in space. So we all watched Jason X,
Hmm.
but I haven't gotten around to. I wanted to have like a marathon one day of all of them so I can have a better recall. But yeah, I don't remember that scene.
Yeah. Well, moving on from six, we see he basically ties a big chain on him, and Jason's supposed to sink down to the lake where he's supposed to
Yeah,
stay until chapter seven happens. And chapter
of
seven's
course.
the start of as we mentioned before, the sleeping bag kill, which technically
Uh-huh.
he hit that girl probably like was supposed to hit the girl in the sleeping bag like 3 or 4 times up against the tree. But this is where the MPAA wanted to step in and really whatever had it in for Friday the 13th. So that movie, as great as it is, they cut a lot of stuff out of it, which I find interesting because there were movies that came out later than that or came out in the same year that were far more gorier, and yet they didn't
Yeah.
get the X rated and they didn't have to cut down. So,
Huh. Yeah.
but
I wonder why.
I think they just wanted to make the MPA probably, and I don't know how much knowledge you have since you've been in the movie industry of them, but I think they just had a prejudice against Friday the 13th and wanted to make an example out of them, perhaps.
Yeah.
I think that's,
Well, I know Rob Zombie had the same problem. Sometimes they do fixate on a certain director or a certain film that gets sort of a double standard review, so to speak, from the MPAA. Yeah.
Yeah. But this was Kane Hodder's debut as Jason. This is where he kind of took, I know the fans will be screaming in the comments, but I can't remember who played him in part 6, but he's one of the more celebrated ones, and rightfully so. And Kane kind of took that and went crazy with it. I love the look of
Yeah.
Jason, especially when his mask breaks off when he's having this duel pretty much with this kind of, I guess, telekinetic. And I love that angle because that's something that was like introducing something different to the series that we hadn't
Yeah,
seen yet.
absolutely. I
Someone
mean,
with
it
a
is a horror
particular
trope, of course, with Carrie and,
right,
some of the other, what was the, I'm drawing a blank, but the, shoot, what was it called? Anyway, yeah, telekinesis was very popular in the 70s for horror movies. So it's kind of a fun nod back at that trope.
once again, yeah, another nod back to something before it. But I think it worked for it. I think the only problem I have, and I'm not going to like get mad at the filmmakers the fact that they had to cut it down to get to maintain the R rating. That's not their fault. I thought the ending was a little hokey where her father pops up out of the ocean and drags Jason back, or not the ocean but the lake, and drags him back down. I thought, well, he doesn't even look like a zombie, but okay, I guess they probably ran out of money for that part. But
Yeah, possibly. Definitely know about low budget filmmaking. You got to do what you got to do. But yeah, I
right.
think that one of the things about this series that's so much fun is how it's not afraid to evolve or try some really out of left field ideas and incorporate them into the existing world in a pretty organic way. So it still works.
Yeah, and I think it definitely worked in this one for what they did with it. Um, Once again, he had a pretty good, he had a good group of characters. You had that one character, the one girl who she was the quintessential. You can't wait till she dies, and I think the rich, prissy one. You're like, oh boy, when Jason gets his hand on her, and he does, applaud. But the rest of the characters, you kind of like, you have the shy little girl who's like trying to be all sexy and all that stuff, and you have your typical stoner guy who's a lot of fun, but he meets his demise too. But you had good characters in that movie, I thought.
Yeah, yeah, I like that one. But now we're coming up on Jason Takes Manhattan, my least favorite.
Yeah,
What do you
mine
think
too.
of
And I've only seen it one time, and I've never
Oh, that's
had
enough.
it. Yeah, and well, I mean, it had some of the elements you would want. I just thought, okay, you kind of sold me a bill of goods here because really only about 15, 20 minutes of this movie really takes place in Manhattan, i.e., Canada, because I think it was actually filmed in Vancouver, that part.
Right.
Vancouver or
Yeah.
Toronto, I can't remember which one. Maybe one of our Canadian friends can let us know. It's okay. It's just not one I just want to. And then the very ending where they throw whatever, I guess, New York Harbor sewer water at him, and he reverts back to being a kid. And it's like, well,
It's like the
they
swamp
tried to
thing
do
or
something
I don't know.
different, but
Yeah, it's crazy. And well, I mean it's crazy, but it's not crazy fun because the movie's really pretty dull until he gets into Manhattan and starts wreaking havoc there. It takes a long time to start moving, in my opinion.
yeah, which uh, which is by this time you probably not something you want to do. You could do that with the first one because the first one kind of takes its time a little bit. Even the second
Yeah.
one does, but by the time you start getting into 3 and 4, they've now established their pattern. And eight's one of those movies that kind of goes off of it. And I guess the only memorable scene from that is when he punches that guy's like going to try and box him, and he just knocks his head off.
Yeah.
But that's like the
Yeah, that
one
is a good
memorable
one.
scene. So you could watch
Yeah.
that movie in 10 seconds, basically. Just fast forward to that, and you're good.
Exactly. Yeah. Hit the highlights.
And then we get to chapter 9, Jason Lives. And that's one that I've only seen it a couple times, and I kind of want to go back and revisit to think maybe it's better than I thought it was. What did you think of that one? Because it gets a little
Um,
weird.
uh, is 9 not Jason Goes to Hell, or am I mixed up?
I forgive me. You're right. It is Jason Goes to
Okay,
Hell. Jason Lives is part 6, but
right.
yeah,
Yeah.
Jason Goes to Hell. This is where we've determined that he is a big worm.
I know. Yeah, it's not very good either, but at least it's kind of weird. It's got that kind of weird factor going for it where, he's blown up by the FBI and the spirit, kind of possesses different bodies. So, I got to give it points for ingenuity, but it's also not one of my favorites in the franchise.
Yeah, it's one that I want to at least give another look to, and maybe of course we have Friday 13th next week, and there's going to be another one in December. So maybe in December watch I will give that. I do remember the character, and I think it's played by the actor. I want to say Stephen James plays the character. He's like a bounty hunter. Creighton Dukes, the character's name. I do remember really liking that character just because he was kind of a badass. So,
Yeah,
but
I
that,
mean, well, there's definitely in this, you'd think with this unhinged killer in all these different iterations that the cops would be after him at some point, and this is where we really get to see like a homicide detective coming into the picture, which is a little different.
yeah, I don't know. I think I just pulled did something. And I can't put my finger on what they could have done differently, maybe story wise with it. But I don't know. I'll give it another watch. It's once again, it's not. I don't. It's not as bad as 8, but probably not as good as any of the others. But I certainly would give it another shot anyway.
Yeah, I mean, the next one though, Jason X, is really fun. Like I said, I recently rewatched that with friends on a movie
Mhm.
night, and some of them hadn't seen it before, and it kind of stands alone, which is good too, because for some of my younger friends who aren't familiar with the whole franchise, you can just watch this one and you can get something out of it. But also, if you're a fan of the franchise, there are a lot of fun nods to previous installments. So I think it's a really cool one. And of course, you gotta love the cryogenic kill scene. I mean, that's just so.
Oh, the face plant. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, another memorable scene, and they do pay homage when they're like in this virtual thing. This time he gets to do the Kane gets to do the sleeping bag kill to its full vision because it
Yeah.
hits him several times up against the tree. And once again, this is a movie that kind of makes a wink and a nod to itself because it kind of plays up to, you know, you have these virtual girls saying, "Hey, you want to party, smoke pot, have premarital sex?" And of course,
You're
Jason
right. It's
kills
got
them.
all the
Right, and
crazy tropes.
right,
Yeah,
and
well, a a friend of mine who's I knew when I lived in LA, and now we're both in different areas. But
mhm,
Todd Farmer is the screenwriter of that, and
yes,
he's also in the movie as one of the
mhm,
video game players.
right.
And he's just such a fun character, both personally and professionally. He also wrote Drive Angry and
My Bloody
My
Valentine,
Bloody Valentine, another
the remake.
3D movie. So yeah, so it's really fun that he is such a horror fan. He's a genuine horror fan. So when he does these screenplays, you can really feel the love.
Oh yeah, I've seen him on other YouTube shows where he's come on as a guest, and he seems
Uh-huh.
like a guy that you would just have a lot of fun with. So yeah, I'm familiar with him. He, of course, he also had an appearance in My Bloody Valentine as well.
Yes,
In
quite
that,
the appearance.
yes, it
Got to
was.
see all of him.
Made me jealous. I'm like, God, I wish I could do that
Right? He does
someday.
work out a lot.
20 years ago, I could do that, but not now. But anyhow,
Couldn't we
um,
all?
yeah. But yeah, so yeah, it was certainly a movie made by, once again, I think most of these movies have been made by people that generally love the horror genre as well as the series. And obviously, Todd Farmer, who wrote this, certainly loved it. And that movie includes a cameo from the great David Cronenberg, of all people.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, that's really a lot of fun.
which doesn't seem like that would jive, but given the type of movies that Cronenberg does, but just shows that once again, I think he has fun with anything. So it's like he'll
Yeah,
direct
yeah,
anything,
he's
he'll
not
act
just
in anything. He
yeah,
played a
not just the serious body horror guy, but he can also have fun with one of these kind of goofy franchises and play a little cameo in there that horror fans love to see.
oh yeah. They're like, oh, there's David Cronenberg, awesome. So, yeah, they pulled out all the stops. A lot of people, I think that's a movie too that's like growing on people's as far as getting more love. I think initially when that movie came out, didn't get a whole lot of love.
Yeah,
I
you're
always
right.
liked it, and I think now people are enjoying it for what it
Yeah,
is.
I did too. Yeah, sometimes these things take a while to catch on and become sort of a cult classic, but you also have to kind of remember that when it came out in 2001, it had been almost 10 years between Friday the 13th films.
Hmm.
And so people were expecting, maybe the second coming of Christ in the form of Jason. So it didn't happen. And that might have added to the disappointment at the time. But now it's really just become its own cool thing.
Yeah, and that was like like I said, like almost 10 years, and then of course we talked a little bit about Freddy versus Jason. That was a movie that was they were talking about happening for 15 years. Well,
Right.
and by the time they made it, for whatever reason, they decided not to bring Kane Hodder back to play Jason, which was everyone's dream to see Kane Hodder versus Robert England, and we didn't quite get that. Not that the actor didn't do a
Yeah.
bad job as Jason. I think from a fan standpoint, and I know I don't know if you've seen Kane Hodder's biography that he's or the
The book that he wrote, I read
documentary they
the book.
did.
Oh,
Okay, well,
yeah.
there's a documentary to Hell and Back,
Oh, I see.
and he
Yeah.
was like for several years kind of really hurt by that they didn't bring him back because I think he had already had this rivalry between him and Robert England, kind of like a friendly little thing that one of these days they're going to be on the movie together, duking it out, and it didn't quite happen. Um, but he
Yeah.
ended up
Do you
going on
recall
to play
why? I mean,
Victor Crowley.
yeah, that's true. But yeah, I did read the book, but I can't remember why didn't they bring him back? Did he say what he thought the
It was,
reasons
from
might
what
be?
I understand, the director, whoever they brought in, and once again, I don't remember the director, but he
Um,
just wanted
yeah,
to
wasn't
use
that
someone
Ang Lee
else.
or yeah, I think wasn't it Ang Lee who directed that or somebody? It was like way off of who you thought it might be. Let
It
me
was
see, was
someone,
it
and I don't want to pick on. I want to say it was like either an Asian or European director, and
oh,
I'm certainly
Ronnie
not.
Yu. Yeah, it was Ronnie Yu. That's right. And he directed one of the Chucky movies. He did a great job on that.
Mm,
But then yeah, not as great a job on Freddy versus Jason.
yeah, I mean, there's some cool kills in that one, but like I said, I was just expecting more out of it. I think, and like I said, I think from a fan's perspective, you bring back Kane. Up to that point had already played him 4 times as it was,
Yeah.
and is most synonymous with that role. And like I say, if you wanted to add some more meat to the story, you figure a way to bring back Nancy or Tommy or Nancy and whomever, because Nancy's kind of like the main, most popular final girl in the Nightmare on Elm Street series. But
Yeah.
they did it. It made a lot of money for sure, and almost spawned another. I don't know if you ever heard the story of how after that they were almost going to do a Hellraiser Halloween um,
No,
crossover.
really.
Yeah, it.
With the
Yeah, it
same crew
at
or
the at the time, Dimension Films, which granted they got the idea. Remember, that's a Weinstein company, and at the time they had the movie rights to both series.
mm,
And
okay.
as the story I was told to me, or I've heard, I think it was Doug Bradley that even said it in an interview, that Clive Barker was approached and he said, "Well, I'll write the story if John Carpenter directs it." And Carpenter was like, "I'll direct it if Barker writes it." Because I think those two just wanted an excuse to work together. But for one reason or
Yeah.
another, politics or what have you, it just didn't happen. I think I had heard that
Yeah,
Mustafa
that would have
Cod
been cool.
I think, and I don't even know what the story was even going to be, but I kind of would have confidence that if Clive Barker's writing it and John Carpenter's directing it, it would have turned out good. I had heard that Mustafa Akkad, who was of course still alive back then, put the kibosh on it because even though Dimension had
Hmm.
the movie rights, he still had the yay or nay vote whether or not to go forward. So I don't know. So it never happened, but that's just a little side note. And plus, there was an idea that Pinhead was going to make a cameo at the end of Freddy versus Jason, but that didn't happen for probably because of different studios. But just a little extra stuff there.
Yeah, that would have been cool.
But yeah, so we get past that, and now we get to the 2009 remake, which I think is probably one of the best. I mean, the 2000s was like full of remakes. I think this one,
Yeah.
and most of them I thought, personally, I thought were good. This one might be the best out of all of them, and it's probably maybe it's in my top five as far as Friday the 13th films go because I think it almost felt like a greatest hits collection. Like they basically combine elements of two, three, and four, a little bit of the original, and kind of just put them all together into one because you get the sackhead Jason look, you get the hockey mask look, and I think Derek Mears really tried to honor all the different versions of Jason in that movie.
Yes, he did. When I was working for the Sci-Fi Channel, let's see. Now they sent me and Patrick Lee to the set, so we got to see some of it being filmed in the middle of the night. It was a night shoot, and so that's where I got to meet Derek Mears and met him quite a few times after that at conventions. And he's just a great guy, and he did do a fantastic job, I think. And you're right. I mean, Platinum Dunes was definitely doing a lot of remakes and an awful lot of
Hmm.
horror movies around that time, but this is one of the better offerings. I agree.
Yeah, I think so. I think it gave the fans everything you would have wanted out of Friday the 13th. I think it paid its respects to the original movies, particularly those of the early 80s, and it put a little bit of a different twist on it. This is like the most athletic looking Jason, I think. So credit to Derek Mears. And the ironic thing is I don't know if you saw Hatchet 3, but there's a scene, of course, Derek Mears is in that. You have Kane Hodder, the former Jason, and they have a little bit of a fight. It doesn't end well for Derek in that movie or in that scene, but it was kind of cool to see two former Jasons duking it out on the screen.
Oh wow, no, I didn't see that one. I've seen parts one and two of the Hatchet films, but yeah, I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, he dies a pretty grisly way, but it's fun.
Oh,
As you would expect from a Hatchet movie for sure. But yeah,
exactly.
and
Yeah.
so and now since then we have not had another Friday the 13th movie. It's sounding like we've been hearing this now. There's been this big rights issue. Both Victor Miller and Sean Cunningham have been at in court with each other and all that, and that's kind of delayed stuff. I don't know all the details of it and don't really care. But now it looks like we're going to get a TV series. Um,
Okay.
which
I
from what
mean, they've made series of Scream and, the other some of the other films. So yeah, that could work
yeah,
depending
from
on
what
who
I
does
yeah, well, A24 had some input into it for a while. I don't know if they still do. I
it.
don't know
I
if
don't think
that's as
824 and the Friday the 13th franchise are really mesh very well.
I was thinking the same thing. I mean, I like a lot of A24's films, but it's like trying to serve uh, a hamburger in a fine dining steakhouse. Why? Um,
Yeah.
if
Did
you
you
know what
ever
I'm.
see the TV series Slasher? Like who the makers behind that series would be great at resurrecting Friday the 13th.
I I haven't. Well, I could think
It's
of
great.
one
Yeah.
director that I happen to know that I'm talking to right now that I'd love to see have her shot at a Friday the 13th movie. Not mentioning any names or anything, but
Okay. Well, it remains to be seen, but you
yeah,
know that Jason is definitely coming back one way or another.
yeah. It sounds like with the TV series they plan on Sounds like it's going to be a prequel. They want to focus on Pamela Voorhees
Okay.
and
Why
Jason
not?
before
Yeah.
he has the accident. I don't know how well that's going to play. That works well for like the Norman Bates series, I suppose,
Yeah.
or
Yeah, that was
I,
good. Yeah,
I
I
don't know
could
if
see
that
that.
works. Once again, if you veer off the original, veer off the basic formula, Jason or Friday the 13th movies, I don't know how well it'll be received. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see. It's probably going to be another year, maybe 2 years before we see this series. But
Yeah. Hmm. All right. Well, I look forward to it. I'll check it out.
one thing, if they ever did do a movie, one thing I'd like to see done, they haven't done this for the most part. Friday the 13th always takes place during the summer. But as you know, Friday the 13th can happen at any given time of the year. I've always wanted to see a
This is
movie
true.
take place in the winter time. I just think that would be a cool element and something they haven't done before. They can still keep it kind of the same. You have a bunch of kids, maybe a bunch of people partying during the winter. They're going to have like this big weekend getaway in the winter log cabin type of feeling. Maybe it takes place in January, maybe February, the day before Valentine's Day, 13th before 14th. You could do some cool stuff with that type of environment.
Yeah. Well, he could
That's
wear a faux fur hockey mask to keep himself warm.
there. You could look like Han Solo from Empire Strikes Back, only with the mask on.
Exactly.
Is there anything you would want to see them do different that they haven't done before in the series?
Geez, it seems like they've covered so much ground. I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing a sort of a return to form from the first few films, where it's just kind of a straight ahead slasher. I kind of like that, and I feel like that's an element that's been missing from the franchise, except for, like you said, the remake was a slasher
Mm.
for sure. So yeah, it would be interesting to see that.
So, in other words, make them a little bit more grounded, maybe not so much the
Yeah.
supernatural zombie version or the cyber version that we saw in Jason X.
Right.
Go
I mean,
back
it's like
to
Chucky. He just keeps getting more and more outrageous with each iteration. So I kind of like
hmm
the originals, of all the of our favorite slashers. So and yeah, Jason is no exception.
well, and I don't know if you've seen those, and I haven't seen them yet. I've heard of them. There's those fan films that have been made on YouTube called "Don't Hike in the Woods," and I think
No, I haven't seen them.
I haven't seen those either. I hear they're good. They're basically fan films that people made, basically Friday the 13th, basically only not because they can't use the name, obviously, but like, you know,
Uh-huh.
someone like that should be given a shot. I'm thinking at making one of these films, or even someone like yourself, or some, other independent filmmakers that ultimately most of these people that start these horror franchises are independent in any way. Carpenter was,
That's true.
Craven was,
Yep.
Sean Cunningham was, Barker was. So it's like, give someone new a chance at it and see what they can add to the series if we're going to have another movie, if ever. If not, way I look at, they've done something that most series don't do, and that's end on a good note. And I think with the remake, they ended on a good note. So it's like, well,
That's true. Yeah.
I'd almost rather them not make anything if it's going to be bad and just kind of like leave it where it is and focus on the next series or what have you.
Yep. There's always some kind of new horror movie coming along, which is great.
Yeah. Well, we've got the Terrifier movies. We had Thanksgiving from last year. From what I've heard, because it didn't play at my city and it just had limited release, I hear the movie Stream is really good, or at least a lot of fun for what it is. So
Yeah.
hopefully that comes to streaming, no pun intended, soon, so I can check it out. But
Yeah, I enjoyed that one. And Megan, I liked. There's another one after the first one coming. So
right,
I mean, there's always something for us to watch for sure.
yeah, and we just had the final um, part three of the Ty West trilogy with Maxine. Um,
Yeah.
What did you think of that? And not to get off Friday the 13th, but we're pretty much done there. But once again,
Hmm.
a Ty West, I'm guessing, probably a fan of that series, along with a lot of
Oh
the older
yeah, for sure.
slashers, especially with X. What did you think of
Hmm.
Maxine? Because I little kind of a mixed reception to that one compared to the first two.
I know. Well, actually didn't like Pearl at all. I loved X. So X is
Really?
still my favorite. Yeah,
Same here.
Maxine is my second favorite. And because I was actually around in the 80s in LA, so it
Hmm.
definitely had the nostalgia factor for me growing up there. Um, but it kind of really went off the rails at the end. I think there should have been a different killer. I think there should have been more of a twist. But I love Mia Goth. I think she's
Yeah.
fantastic. So I could just watch her read the phone book and be entertained. But so yeah, I liked it overall. It was fun from the nostalgia factor, and it had some great music in it. But it
Right.
just the end did not work for me, and I thought, well, maybe I had a different expectation, so I'll
Hmm.
watch it again. And I watched it a second time, and it still didn't quite work for me. That ending was just kind of like it reminded me a little bit of the ending of De Palma's The Black Dahlia, where it just goes
Hmm.
nuts, and you're like, wait,
Right.
what? What did you think?
I thought, and I've only seen it once, and I do need to probably need to rewatch it again. One thing is, you're like I feel like, all right, we must be like related somehow or something, because I'm of the same opinion. X is by far my favorite. Pearl I liked, but most people I know seem to think Pearl is this masterpiece. And whereas I liked it, it's certainly better than a lot of other things. I didn't hold it up to the same standard that I did with X. And probably once again, maybe it's a time period thing where I'm familiar with the
Yeah, I
70s and
don't.
80s, and I think it just
Right? Yeah,
resonates
I don't like
better.
that the era
But
of the 20s and 30s, but
I think it's a cool thing to do that, though, by the way.
mhm.
So
Oh yeah,
maybe if you
absolutely.
had
It's
a little bit
very
more, I would have liked to see more of Howard in that, because, that's her
mhm.
husband. We're introduced to him in X, but we don't see him up until the last 5 minutes of the movie. So it's like, okay, I want to know a little bit more about their relationship if we're going to do this as a prequel. We get that
Yeah.
Pearl's crazy. What's How does Howard fit into this, and does he just gradually become a willing accomplice, or does he just do it right away with her? I would have liked to have known
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
part, I guess. But as far as Maxine goes, I thought with Maxine, besides the ending, I thought there was like X and Pearl at least were both pretty simple. One location, a handful of characters, and we're just going to focus on that. Whereas Maxine's a much bigger film. You have a lot more characters, a lot more different settings, and I don't know if that took away from the first two a little bit. I almost would have rather seen just a back to a simple setting, I guess, but maybe the story didn't dictate it that. I will say I like look like Ty West was trying to pay homage to Giallo movies with this movie. He didn't
Oh
quite
yeah, for
get
sure.
there. Um,
No, no, he didn't. But yeah, you can really now that we can bring it back to Friday the 13th because Kevin Bacon is in Maxine.
exactly. So it's like, and think
It all
about
makes
Kevin
sense.
Bacon. Getting back to the original, most actors get their debut in one of these movies, but Kevin Bacon had already done National Lampoon's Animal House in 1978 before doing Friday the 13th. So it almost seemed he went from a big, which at the time was a pretty big blockbuster comedy, because Animal House was like one of the biggest films of that year, to go back down to doing a low budget film like this. I'm wondering, I've never heard him really be interviewed or talked about it, but I'm just kind of curious how he ended up going to that place where he ended up accepting that role for Friday the 13th. I guess maybe he just had a drought and just was willing to take any role that came his way. I think you froze on me.
Film and yeah, you see that a lot. But you're
Yeah.
kind of breaking up a little bit. I think we're not
Yeah,
don't
you
have a
broke
good
up
signal
on
all.
me, but I think we're back on sync now.
Okay. And now you're in the dark. You're like you're in a Friday the 13th campground.
Yeah, I got well, Jason came after me. No, actually Ethel that was her name, I think. Part 5 came out after me and yelled at me for being on her land or whatever. But but
Oh,
anyhow, well, Stacy, it was great having you on tonight. I hope everyone
thank
enjoys this
you.
series. If you're big fans of Friday the 13th, give us a like and subscribe. And like I said, have a happy Friday the 13th, and we will see you next time. Good night, everyone.